All right, hello everyone. My name is Dr. Joel Rosen. I am the Adrenal Fatigue Recovery Ninja, and I want to welcome you back to another edition of Metabolic Flexibility. I want to ask you this question. We're talking about metabolic flexibility because we know that you're exhausted, you're tired, you can't deal with stress very well, you think you may have an adrenal fatigue problem, you know that food sensitivity testing for microbial growth, doing leaky gut, avoiding gluten, dairy, corn, all those things, and you're still not feeling better and you don't get it. What's not working? I did the genetic test and that doesn't tell me anything, or it does and it didn't fix the problem. Let me ask you this. Have you fixed your blood sugar levels yet? Have you? My guess is you haven't. So I want to ask you this question. Would you die of hypoglycemia? Would you die of hypoglycemia? Think of it. You probably say, yeah, if I didn't eat enough, at some point I would die. And I'm going to question that. I'm going to say, no, you wouldn't actually die of hypoglycemia if you didn't eat. Let's just keep in consideration you're drinking water, okay? You're able to drink water, so you're not going to die of dehydration. But at some point, if you're not getting any food, you may die, all right? But it's not going to be of hypoglycemia. And so I want you to listen to that. You're not going to die of hypoglycemia. I know you feel like, oh my God, if I don't eat, I'm going to get shaky, I'm going to get anxious, I'm going to be irritable and enraged. You'll get over that. And we need you to understand that. But you're not just going to go ahead and say, okay, Dr. Rosen, I'm going to go out tomorrow, I'm going to go fast because this insulin thing is the problem and I'm going to fix it. It doesn't work that way. We're educating you first. I want you to understand about the feedback loop. And the feedback loop, remember we talked about RD, RA in a couple of videos, go check it out. Well, RD was the disposal, so how much of glucose is being spilled out. And RD and RA is the how much is the glucose being put out by the liver. And then we also have utilization. All right, so the utilization is sort of the same thing as the disposal. So you have the disposal, how much is being utilized and by the bloodstream, the red blood cells, the brain, the liver, the urine, and how much is being put out there by the liver. And those values have to equal each other. That's the feedback loop. The amount that glucose is being put out into the bloodstream by the liver has to equal the amount that's being utilized. Now, if you're eating a lot of glucose or eating a lot of food, you're going to have a higher turnover rate. That's where we are now. But the big question is, would you die of hypoglycemia? The answer is no. They've actually shown that when your body is not getting any calories, any glucose, so let's say you're on a 24-hour fast, there's no more glycogen stores. You can't do glycogenesis. You have to do gluconeogenesis. That means you've got to form new glucose from other tissues. Now, you're not just going to break down your muscles and spill them into the blood supply because glucose 6-phosphate. We're going to talk a little bit about that. There's no enzyme there to help put it in there. That's what's great about us surviving and being the survival of the fittest. We get this short burst of muscle energy from the glucose that's in the muscle, but that can't go to other tissues. So what happens is, ultimately, your body, there's no insulin, right? Because you haven't eaten for a while. So insulin will allow protein to be broken down, or the lack of insulin will allow protein to be broken down. In fact, the lack of insulin will allow ketones to be broken down. The lack of insulin will allow carbohydrates to be broken down. That's stored in the liver if they're there. But the insulin will allow, if it's not there, it doesn't have the inhibition of allowing us to break down tissues. So that should be an aha moment for you. So what happens is you're not eating, you've depleted your glycogen stores, you have to do gluconeogenesis through protein, and what that means is you're breaking down protein. And what you would die of is you would die of respiratory failure because there's no proteins to sustain oxygen to be able to pump the lungs and make them go. That's what you would die of. And my guess is that you should realize that if you're going to start to do some of these things that I'm telling you about and making sure you're controlling your insulin levels so it's not constantly pumping glucose into the bloodstream because of all the foods that you're eating and having to match the rate of utilization, and the fact that insulin is not the only thing that's responsible for getting glucose out of the bloodstream. It accelerates it, but glucose will do a fine job on its own. Things called glut receptors, which we're going to talk about in a second, that will help glucose get out of the bloodstream without insulin. So the question should be asked is, well, how do I do that? How do I make sure I don't have insulin? What would you answer to that if you were to ask me that? You don't eat food, or you eat very little food. Now, does that mean, okay, forget this, I'm not watching this anymore, I want to eat food, I like food? No, it doesn't mean that. But guess what? You don't have a choice now. You're doing so many things that isn't working. You're going to one doctor after the next, $400 or $500 worth of supplements. You're changing doctors, integrated doctors, you're trying medications, but no one's told you about this. No one's told you about your glucose. And well, I've looked at it, I've tried to go gluten-free. Yeah, but gluten-free doesn't mean you can go and eat all the different grains that aren't gluten, and now you have all these gluten-free breads and gluten-free this and gluten-free that, and then you eat a lot of protein, and protein's available for gluconeogenesis to spill more glucose, so you have your insulin levels are high, it's spilling glucose into the bloodstream. No, that's not what you need to do, and you wouldn't die if you wouldn't eat food and you were keeping nice and hydrated because of hypoglycemia. We are engineered, it's interesting because it's a survival value. It wouldn't do us any good if we went through famine in our hunting gathering stages and we became hypoglycemic and our brain became mush. It doesn't work with that. In fact, we don't become hypoglycemic to the point where our brain becomes mush. We become more focused and more concentrated because we know our survival's on the line. So let's talk about what we need to do about this in the next video, and hopefully this is making a lot of sense for you. See you in the next